In this video, we're going to show you some of the new features and enhancements in Aspire version 4. There is also a companion tutorial that covers some of the other things that have been added to the software, and if you haven't already looked at that, you may want to watch that first because it covers some of the fundamentals like the changes we've made to Aspire's interface. In this video, we're going to create the model you can see on the screen to demonstrate some of the new options. I'm going to start showing you how you can drag and drop data directly into the interface now to load it into a part, before moving on to look at a variety of the vector manipulation tools that have been enhanced in this version. When we get to the modelling stage, we're going to start with the two-rail sweep, which have been greatly changed in order to give you much more control over the components you're now creating. Then we're going to look at the extrude and weave function in order to create the weave pattern you can see in the background of our dome. Before going on to a new combine mode that's been added. This is similar to adding or subtracting a component, but now we can multiply them together. This gives us the ability to create some very interesting fading and masking effects between sets of components. Lastly, we'll go back to the extrude and weave tool to take an existing 3D model and show you how we can create the border shape that we've got on the design. Let's go ahead and open a new copy of the software. For this example, we're going to start with a new file, which is 12 inches wide, 15 inches high, thickness set to 1, and the XY datum position set to the center of the part. I'm going to work with the modeling resolution set to high. Let's go ahead and hit OK. Now I want to go ahead and open the image that I want to base the part on. In Aspire 4, we now have the ability to take files from Windows Explorer. You can see I've just opened a copy there, and actually just drag and drop them into the software to load them into the job. So here I want to take this image here, flourish.jpg. I'm going to click on it, just drag into the 2D view here and let go in order to import that image into my part. Now if we just click in the window, I'm going to select that image. I'm going to come over and click on a new icon, which is this Align Selected Objects icon. This now collects together all the icons that previously used to be available on the Drawing tab, but because we've added some new options here, like the ability to align to the outside edge and to space objects within the part, we had to go to a form where we could fit all these additional icons on. So now all the Align tools are collected together under that single icon. Here I'm going to click on the option to center this vertically and horizontally in the part. Also, the shortcut key for that is still F9. Next, I'm just going to click on that again to go into transform mode and just hold the shift key down to hold it horizontally and drag that across so it's roughly positioned in the center there with the center line of my job setup. Now what I want to do with this selected is go into the trace bitmap function. If we click on this, we'll see that there's a few changes in this form. One, I now have the ability to dynamically fade the bitmap to make it easier for me to see my part. I also have this preview button down the bottom here. So what I can do is adjust my parameters, hit the preview, and that'll show me the vectors I'm going to get. For instance, if I back off the noise fields here and hit preview, you can see we'd get a different selection there. Let's just put that back up to 10 and hit preview, and there I get a cleaner set of vectors. So the nice thing with this is I can just keep adjusting my settings within the form until I'm happy with the way this looks, hitting the preview button to reapply this until I'm content with the vectors I've got, and then I can just hit apply and close in order to accept them. Next, I want to switch off my bitmap layer. We don't need that anymore. We now have two ways to access the layers in Aspire 4. We can do it from the Layers tab down the bottom here, or if we go back to the Drawing tab, we have a way to access a smaller version of the Layer Manager by clicking on the down arrow here. This will show me all the layers listed in the part and give me control over their visibility, their colour, and also on the list icon at the end here, lots of other functions for controlling actions on a layer. In this case, I just want to come into the drop down, click on the light bulb to undraw the bitmap layer and hit the close button. Now if I click on the icon to go into node editing and select one of the vectors, we can see that we've still got quite a lot of points in here after we've done the vector fitting to the outline of the bitmap, and I would expect that. What I'm going to do is use the tool in order to fit curves to these vectors in order to simplify them, to make them easier to edit. Let's just come over and click on the icon to go back into selection mode. I'm going to choose both these vectors and then click on the curve fit icon. The major enhancement to this is the fact that it now displays to me the nodes on my curves that I've got selected, and we also again have this preview button here. So once more I can make changes. I'm going to choose to go to Bezier curves. Let's set a tolerance of 0.005 of an inch. I'm going to choose the option to replace selected vectors and hit preview. I instantly get really good feedback on how much that's simplified my curves, and then what I can do is continue to edit the tolerance or the other parameters if I want, and hit the preview button again until I'm happy with how simple I've made these curves. Obviously, the larger the tolerance gets, the less accurate they're going to be to the original set of vectors that I had, but in this case that's not a problem for me. So I'm happy with the way that looks. I can see we've really simplified those curves quite nicely. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Now with those vectors selected, we'll click on the icon to zoom selected objects. Let's click to deselect them and hit N on the keyboard to go into node editing. Select this first vector here, and I'm just going to delete the span at the bottom, delete this node. I'm going to select this vector. We'll go ahead and delete that, delete the span here, and then come up to the top and just cut the vector there and delete that piece. Next I'm going to select this. We'll just edit this so that it comes down and around. We'll zoom in there, and at the top here I want to right mouse click, go to properties, just change that so it's exactly at X0 and hit apply. Let's go back to zoom to fit. Next, I'm going to come back to selection mode. I'm going to draw a polyline. I'm just going to sketch a line in here. And this will allow me to show you a new feature that we've got, which is the ability to mirror about a line. So what I'm going to do now is select these two vectors. I'm going to come into the mirror selected objects function. We have a couple of changes in here. One, we can now flip about the job center, as you can see here, and we can also flip about a line. So if I check to make sure I'm going to create a mirrored copy, I shift and select the line here, so that's the last object I've selected. Then I can click on the option to flip about line in order to create a mirrored copy there about that line. Now while we're still in the mirror mode here, I may as well select these two vectors and choose the option to flip about job center and say flip horizontal in order to create the ones on the other side of the middle of our part there. Let's go ahead and hit close now. So now we would continue editing these vectors. In this case though, I'm going to shortcut this process so we can move on and start showing you some of the enhancements with the modelling tools. I'm just going to click and drag to select the vectors we've created and hit delete. I'm going to switch on the bitmap layer again. The reason for that is I want to show you the set of vectors that were finished off using this process. To load these, we're going to go back to Windows Explorer, and you're going to see we have the ability to not only drag and drop things like a JPEG, but also to drag and drop CRV 3D files or even a CRV file from VCarve Pro. In this case I have a Aspire file which has got just vectors in it here, so I can click and drag into the 2D view in order to load those vectors. Just minimize this, then come over and click on the icon to align those in the center of the part, and you can see how we further edited them in order to derive the rest of the vectors that we've got here. It's worth noting that as well as now having this ability to import vectors from a VCarve Pro and an Aspire file, we also have the ability in Aspire to actually save our file in VCarve Pro format. When we save the CRV file, it will only have entities in it that are supported by VCarve Pro, so all 3D components and 3D toolpaths that there isn't an equivalent of in VCarve Pro would not be included in the file. Let's move on now. Let's go ahead and just click in order to deselect these vectors. I'm going to come up, switch off the bitmap layer again. We won't need that for the moment. Now we're going to use these vectors with the 2-rail sweep modelling tool, which you're going to see has been dramatically enhanced for version 4. In order to do this, I'm going to need some cross-section vectors though, so I'm going to come up and click on the icon to draw an ellipse. I'm going to sketch a shape in the top left-hand corner here and make it exactly 1 inch wide by 1/2 inch high. Hit apply, close. We'll just zoom in on that area using the mouse wheel, node edit, and then delete these bottom two spans. Hit escape to go back into selection mode, select this, select it again to go into transform mode, and then I'm just going to click and hold Control and Shift down and drag in order to make 3 copies of that shape. Let's make some edits. I'm going to select this one, hit N to go into node editing, box select these 2 vectors and just use the arrow key in order to move that down. Next I'm going to select this one and I'm going to twist this around and then just lower this down here. Next I'm going to select this one. I'm going to click in order to select these vectors or these nodes, use the arrow key to move it down, then select these 2 nodes in order to move this up. Then I'm just going to select on this, click on the icon to scale. You'll notice another enhancement here is the ability to now scale vectors using a percentage instead of a specific value. In this case I want to just unlink here and set a value of 1/4 of an inch for the height, hit apply and close. Now we have our cross sections. Let's zoom to fit. In fact, we'll come up and click on the icon to tile the window so we can see the 2D view and the 3D view. Let's come down and click on the modeling tab. The biggest change you'll notice here is the fact the component tree is now at the bottom of the modeling tab instead of the top. This gives us more space to show the list of all the components we're working with. Let's come up and click on the icon to go into the 2-rail sweep tool. You'll see that the form for this has changed slightly. In addition, we've got a slightly different way of working with the tool now. We still begin by selecting the 2 vectors that are going to be the drive rails. So I'm going to select this vector here, shift and select this vector here, and then we click on the button to use selection. That'll mark those as the drive rails, putting a green node at the start point of each, making the first selected curve red, the second selected curve green, and putting these arrowheads on to show the flow of each of these vectors. If we wanted to change the direction or the order of selection, we can do that by putting the cursor over one of the rails and right mouse clicking to get this context sensitive menu where we have various things that we can adjust. Here I'm just going to leave my selection as it is. The next thing is to select the cross section that we want to sweep along these 2 drive rails. In this case I'm going to start by just sweeping this single cross section here, and if I am only working with one cross section then I just need to select the vector, then we could come down, enter a name and hit the apply button to see the shape that that's going to give us. Now I'm quite happy with the way that looks, but I think I'd like to soften it as it comes through the middle section but leave the creases at the top and the bottom. That's going to require me to add another cross section into the shape. Previously in Aspire, in order to do that accurately, I would have had to split my drive rails into separate sets of vectors and create multiple 2-rail swept shapes. Now we have the ability in Aspire 4 to take other vector cross sections and assign them to any position we want along our rails. First I need to make sure that I take the initial cross section we've got here, click on the rail to assign that. Next I'm going to select the other cross section I want to use, which is this more rounded shape, and I'm just going to click here and here in order to add that to the shape that we're going to be creating. In order to see the effects of those changes I need to come over and hit the apply button, and now we can see the software is going from the crease shape to the round shape, carrying on to the round shape here and then back to the crease shape there. You'll see more examples of adding these additional cross sections in a moment. But even from this simple example here, you can see what a powerful addition this is to the modeling tools in the software. If I'm happy with the way that looks, I can click on the button to start a new component. Next, I'm going to come over and select this vector, shift and select this vector, click on the button to use selection, and this time I want to take this cross section here, assign that to the shape. Let's go ahead and call this component side, set it to merge and hit apply. So we can see what that looks like there, and you can see the lines in the part showing me how this is flowing along the shape. As well as being able to add different cross sections in, I can also add other copies of the same cross section in order to better control the flow of the shape here. For instance, if I put one here, I can then just click and drag the other end of this in order to reposition it. We'll put one down the bottom here as well in order to reposition that, and then put one in the side here. So you can see I have a great deal of control over the way the shape flows. Now when we hit apply, when we look at the shape in the 3D view, you'll see that update and give me a better reflection of the outside shape there because of these additional cross sections that we've put in order to control the shape that we're sweeping. If I'm happy with the way that looks, I'm going to click on the Start New Component button. We can create the little tie in the middle. We'll select this vector, shift and select this vector, click on Use Selection. I'm going to take this round vector here and assign that to the end, and then I'm going to take this flattened vector here and assign that in the middle there. And again, we'll just call that tie, hit apply. We can see there that we need to make that a bit higher, so I'm going to say scale to exact height. There I can see 1/4 of an inch is good enough for that. I like the way that looks. So I can go ahead and hit close, and you'll now see those 3 components we've been created have been added to the component tree. What I want to do is just take this component here, come up and click on the icon to mirror selected objects, make sure Flip About Job Center is checked, and click on the Flip Horizontal button. Hit close. Let's take a moment just to show you a couple of other new features here. One is the ability to hover over a component in order to see its combine mode, base and total height. So you can see that we just get a tooltip depending which one we're hovering over there. Also, if we come over and click in the 3D view here, a nice new addition is the ability to zoom using the mouse wheel. Previously you had to hold the right mouse key down to zoom, but now just like in the 2D view, we can roll the mouse wheel away from us to zoom in, roll the mouse wheel back towards us to zoom out. Let's go ahead now and select the top component in the list, shift and select the last component. I'm just going to click on the icon here to group the selected objects. We'll right mouse click there, go to rename, and we'll just call that Fleur Group in order to accept the new name. Now I'm going to switch off that component. I'm just going to move some of these vectors onto a different layer. So I'm going to select my cross-section vectors. I'm going to click and drag a box around the vectors for the fleur-de-lis as well. Just right mouse click in the 2D view, move to layer. We'll put those on a new layer that's invisible and inactive and hit OK, so we'll see that they disappear. Next, what I want to do is come over to the Drawing tab. I'm going to click on the Polyline tool. I want it to sketch a line that goes completely across my oval here at a 30-degree angle. So I'm going to click here, come over here, we'll head up so that snaps to 30 degrees and click there, right mouse click. Next, with that selected, I'm going to come over to the Array tool. You'll notice that there's 2 array tools now, one to do a linear array and one to do a circular array. These used to be inside the same icon, but they've been split up because they're quite different approaches to arraying an object. Here we're going to create a linear array. I'm going to create 12 rows in Y, 1 column in X, and the offset for this is going to be 0x and 1.5 Y. And you can see a new option here in Aspire 4 is the ability to group together the copies when we array them. So I'm going to choose that option there because that'll make it easier for me to manipulate these after we've made these copies. So hit the copy button, hit close. You can see if I deselect and click that they're all grouped together. Now I can hit F9 on the keyboard to center those. And then I'm going to come over with those selected and click on Mirror Selected Objects. Choose the option to flip about Job Center and create a mirrored copy, and click Flip Horizontal there in order to create this kind of diamond mesh pattern. Now I'd like to create a rectangle that we're going to use as a cross section to extrude along these lines that we've just generated there in order to make a weave pattern. Let's click on the icon to draw rectangle and set the anchor point in the middle. Set radius to external corners with a radius of 0.05 inches, width of 3/4 of an inch, height of 0.3 of an inch, and hit create and close. Then I'm just going to click on that and zoom in using the mouse wheel here in the 2D view. Next I want to go into node editing. So we can click on the icon there, and before I cut off the bottom half of the rectangle here, I just want to show you a new feature in the software. When we've got a line, we now have these grey squares in the middle here which are virtual midpoints. These will have no effect on the shape at all unless I go ahead and click and drag, in which case it'll create a new node and then subdivide the line again. And so you can see it's very easy for me to keep editing these without having to keep inserting additional nodes. That's a nice new addition there to the node editing tools in the software. Here what I want to do is just come over this span and hit D on the keyboard, this one and hit D to delete, then we'll hit the delete key to get rid of that portion, and then I'm just going to click on this and we'll snap these to the normal midpoints of the line here and here in order to create our cross section that we're going to use. Click back on selection mode and zoom to fit again. Let's come down to the modeling tab. I'm going to come into a new modeling function called Extrude and Weave. I'm going to select this, and what this allows me to do is take single lines and extrude a shape along them. So it's a lot like a single rail sweep. So I'm going to select this group of vectors and shift and select this group of vectors, and these are going to represent all my drive rails for the shape. So I'm going to click on the button to use selection. Next I want to select the vector that I'm going to use for the cross section for these. We can click on one of the lines in order to assign this to all these cross sections here. We're also going to use the option to weave this shape. If I just uncheck that and show you what that looks like, we can see that in the 3D view, and it's just weaving that shape in across between there. You can see I have the option to scale to height set, so I'm going to uncheck that. What I want to do is for the software to raise and lower these areas as each one of these drive rail vector crosses over. So I'm going to check the weave under over at crossings. I'm going to choose the option to scale shape. We'll set this to be 20% and 100% of the original height. So it won't get any higher than the original cross section I drew, but on the areas where it's going under, it'll go down to only 20% of the original height. We've set the name, we can hit apply, we can see the effect that has on the shape we're creating, and then we can go ahead and hit close. Now at this point I'm just going to go ahead and undraw that weave component. I'm going to select these vectors here, right mouse click again and move those onto a layer of their own, which we'll go ahead and call weave, and make that invisible and inactive and hit OK. Now we've moved those vectors onto the other layer, let's come back and switch the weave component on again for a moment. What I want to do is have this weave go over the top of a dome that I'm going to create from the oval. But rather than just crop that to the edge and have these vertical shapes that we've got here, I'd actually like the weave to sort of fade out as it gets to the edge of my oval shape. I can't do that with the standard fade function in the software because that just fades from one direction to another. But what I can use is a new feature that we've added, which is the ability to use a combine mode of multiply with my components. Much like the add or subtract, the multiply essentially does what its name suggests. The component that you set to that combine mode will multiply all the pixel heights of everything previously in the component list by the pixel heights of that component itself. Where this becomes really beneficial is when we think about the fact that when we multiply something by 0, it becomes 0, and when we multiply something by 1, it stays the same value. So in this case, what I'm going to do is create a multiply shape which is effectively at a height of 1 in the middle and 0 at the edge, and so in the middle it'll retain the original height and then fade that down to the edge as it comes down to a height of 0. As we go through this process in a minute, this will hopefully make some sense. Let's go ahead and just undraw the weave component there. I'm going to select my vector here and I'm going to create this multiplying shape. So I'm going to come up and click on create shape from vectors. I'm going to have an angle of 60 degrees that we're going to use for this, and very importantly, as I said before, I want this to go from 0 to 1, so I'm going to enter scale to height of 1 inch, and we'll set the name of this to be multiply and hit apply and close. Now I can't set the multiply combine mode when I'm making a component. I have to do it subsequent to creating it. So what I'm going to do is just select this component here, right mouse click, go to combine mode, and you can see we now have the option to set this to multiply. When we do that, everything's going to disappear because that's the only component we have drawn, and because there's nothing else to multiply, the result's going to be 0. That's why we can see an empty 3D view. If I switch on another component like the weave, what we're going to see is within the area of that multiplying component, what I described before is happening. The middle section is staying at its original height because it's multiplied by a height of 1 on the dome, and the edge is going all the way down to 0. The problem I've got is outside of that component there is no multiplying factor, so that just stays as it originally is. So there's several ways to approach this. One way would be to crop the shapes back, or another way would be to actually have some shape on the outside here which is also set to 0. There's a new function that's been added to Aspire 4 that allows us to easily create a component that is in effect a 0 plane that covers the whole surface of the part. This is useful when we're working with multiplying components with this, and also particularly useful when you're setting up negative shapes such as part inside of a dished or a recessed area, because that also requires you to have a flat plane for the shape to go down from. Let's go ahead and just deselect in the 2D view here. Let's just set the 3D view to the ISO view. Let's come over and undraw the weave for a moment. Then I'm going to come up to the model drop down, which is the only place this function's available, and choose the option to add 0 plane. When we do this, a component will be created called 0 plane, which is essentially just the size of our job area and is a component that's been created with a base height of 0. This has also been put on a special layer. If we come down and click on the Layers tab, you can see there's now a layer called 0 plane, and the reason that's been done, if we switch it on, is because that could obscure other things in the 2D view if we just automatically had that become visible. So here I'm going to leave that switched off there. I'm going to come down, click back on the Modeling tab. What I want to do is combine my multiply and 0 plane together. To do that, I'm going to right mouse click, change the combine mode to add here. Now you can see the result that's going to give us, so I can select both of these and choose the option to group them together. So now I have a component that's made up of the dome and of the 0 plane around the outside here. Next, what I want to do is set that back to multiply mode. As well as the right mouse click option, we can also go in here to the properties, and you can see we have the multiply icon there. So if we click on that to set it, as before, that'll disappear because we have no other component switched on. But now if we switch on the weave component, we can see how, again, that's multiplying the shape in the middle by 1, so it stays at its original height. I think this is around 0.15 of an inch, so 0.15 times 1 equals 0.15, down to the edge here, which is at 0, and all the areas on the outside here which are also 0 as well. So you can see that even though there's some component there, they are completely flat. So I'm happy with the way that looks. So at this point I'm going to select my weave component, shift and select the multiplying component, and just group those together. Next I'm going to shift and select this vector here and use the function to crop the area outside of the oval. That'll bake those components together, so we're just left with a single component that represents our faded weave. So right mouse click on here, rename this, and we'll just call that component weave. Next, I'd like to have a dome so that that weave is flowing over the top of it. So I'm going to select the oval again, come up, click on create shape from vectors, enter an angle of 45 degrees, scale to height of 0.25, we'll call this shape dome, hit apply and close. I'm going to switch on the Fleur group component. We can see everything's just being added together currently. What I would like to do is adjust the size of that and set it so it merges with the weave and both of those things flow over the dome. So I'm just going to right mouse click on the component, get the 2D preview to move to the front. You can see we have that selected there. I'm going to choose the option to set selected object size, and in here I'm going to say link XY, and we'll set that to be 10 inches high, hit apply and close, and then I'm going to click on the align tool in order to align that in the middle of the job, and again we'll just hit close there. Next I'm going to change the properties of this. We'll adjust the height so that it's exactly 1/2 inch, and then that it's got a base height here of 0.15, and hit the spacebar in order to accept that. Next, let's select the weave component, and here I'm going to set this to merge, and now we can see we've got that fleur-de-lis which is sitting proud of the weave there, and both of those are being added to the dome. To finish this part off, I want to use the Extrude and Weave tool again. I'm going to take the oval vector around the outside of the part here, but instead of using a vector cross-section this time, I'm going to use another 3D component to extrude around the shape. To get the component, I'm going to go back to Windows Explorer again. You can see we have a 3D clip file here, and once more I can just click and drag that into the 2D view there in order to load it into the current part I'm working on. Let's just minimize Explorer again there. So there we can see that component. This comprises of a little flower that's been taken from another model and a piece of sort of molding profile here. Let's go ahead and select our oval vector, come into the Extrude and Weave function. I'm going to click on the button to use selection here so we can see that vector get selected. I'm going to click on the option to use component, and I need to click on the drop down then and select the component from the list. So I'm going to choose Flower Extrude here. I'm going to choose the option to fill with multiple copies, and we'll set this to be 10%. I'm going to uncheck the Weave option. Let's go ahead and set that to merge, and we'll call this component border and hit apply. Now we can see there in the 3D view the component that's created for us, and that looks nice, but it's merging into the part here. What I really need to do is have that component tilted up at an angle before we extrude it around the shape. So what I'm going to do is just click on the button to clear rails in order to clear my selection there. I'm going to close this so we don't create a new component. Now I'm going to select our component, come up to Properties, click on the tilt option here, set anchor, and I'm going to click at the top and then click at the bottom here in order to set the positions that we're going to tilt from and to. I'm going to enter an angle that's around about 5 degrees. So we can see if we look at that closely that the software is now just tilting that up for me. Let's go ahead and hit close. Let's click on the extruder shape icon again. I'm going to select the vector, click on use selection, click on use component. We have that correct component selected there. I'm going to set merge, call this border and hit apply, and I can see that's still blending in there, so I must have that in the wrong direction, and that's easy to correct. We can just right mouse click over the rail and choose the option to reverse rail and then hit apply again so that the tilted edge is now on the inside. If we maximize the 3D view, we can see the attractive border that that's creating for us. If we wanted to, we could go ahead and change the overlap here. We just have a 10% overlap at the moment. Perhaps if we wanted the flowers to get closer together or even overlap themselves, we might enter a percentage of 40 or something like that. Hit apply, and then we'll see that creates a new shape for us. This is an extremely powerful function in Aspire 4, not only the ability to extrude and weave vectors, but also the ability to extrude and weave other 3D components as we've done here. Let's go ahead and hit close on the extrude and weave form there. We can just undraw the flower extrude component so that we can see our finished part in the 3D view, and now we'd be ready to go ahead and start creating toolpaths on this if we wanted. So that pretty much concludes this video showing you some of the new features that are available in Aspire 4. There is another tutorial which covers some of the other features that we haven't looked at here. If you haven't already watched that, then I'd recommend doing so in order to get a full overview of everything that's been added to the software. In this video you saw a selection of enhancements and new features that were added to Aspire 4. We started showing you how you can drag and drop files now directly into the interface. We looked at the preview button that's available when you trace bitmaps, and also when you do curve fitting, makes it very easy to iterate through different settings in the form. Then when we got to the modelling stage here, we looked at the changes to the two-rail sweep that give you much greater control over the components that you're creating. We also looked at how we could create a weave pattern using the extrude and weave function that's been added to Aspire 4, as well as then the multiply option in order to fade that out over the surface of our dome, before finally going ahead and using the extrude and weave function in order to create a shape based on another component that was extruded around the drive curve. We'll make sure a copy of the file is saved so that you can download it and use it in your own copy of Aspire 4. And that concludes this video. Thanks for watching.